The first blast shook the station so hard that dust fell from the ceiling panels. Captain Ryland didn't need a status report to know they were under heavy attack. He moved fast through the narrow corridors, the echo of his boots mixing with the distant thud of explosions. His orders were clear: hold the line until reinforcements arrived, but the sudden hit on the outer decks told him the enemy had gotten closer than expected. As he turned the corner into the holding bay, he saw her sitting there, tied to the restraint chair, eyes locked on him like she had been waiting. The alien woman had skin as green as polished, jade and hair like molten silver that caught the light from the overhead panels. Her golden eyes burned with something between anger and defiance. She was still wearing the tight combat gear she had been captured in, its armored plating stripped away but its form-fitting material leaving no doubt. She was a fighter. The bonds around her wrists and chest were secure, but her posture made it clear she wasn't beaten. When Ryland stepped closer, she tilted her head, studying him like a predator studies prey. Without warning, she leaned forward as far as her restraints allowed and spat directly into his face. The warm spit struck his cheek, running down toward his jaw. The act was fast, deliberate, and designed to provoke him. The air between them felt heavier after it happened. A lesser man might have yelled, struck her, or called for guards. Ryland did none of those things. Instead, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving hers. She smirked as if daring him to react, but she underestimated his patience. He walked behind her chair, silent and calm, and pulled a restraint cable from the side compartment. In one swift motion, he looped it across her mouth and tightened it, securing a clean gag that silenced her completely. She jerked in the chair, testing the bindings, but they held firm. Her eyes narrowed, but he could see she understood she had crossed a line, and he had answered without a single word. Outside the thick steel doors, the sounds of battle grew louder. The enemy had cut through another section of the hull, and Ryland knew it was only a matter of time before they reached the bay. He checked the locks on her restraints and the seals on the door before turning his attention back to her. She sat still now, breathing slow, watching him like she was trying to read his thoughts. For the first time, there was something in her gaze other than defiance. It was calculation. Ryland moved to the control console, sealing the bay in full lockdown mode. If the enemy breached the other decks, this would buy him time. But the thought nagged at him. Why had she been so eager to provoke him when she knew the danger outside? Was it a distraction? Was she testing him? He glanced over his shoulder and caught her eyes again. She didn't look away. The gag stopped. Her words, but her expression told him she still had plenty to say. The lights flickered with another impact. Somewhere close, a bulkhead gave way, and the low rumble of boots on metal followed. They were coming. Ryland checked his rifle then, stood between the prisoner and the door. It would be easy to leave her here, but something in his gut told him that if the enemy got hold of her again, the war could turn for the worse. She was valuable, not just to them, but maybe to him too. The decision was forming in his mind before he even realized it. The bay shook under another explosion, and dust rained down again. The enemy was here. Raylan's hand rested on the gag's fastening, and her golden eyes widened slightly. She knew what that meant. In the next moment, whether she walked free or stayed bound would depend entirely on him. And Ryland was not a man who made choices lightly. Rayland stood still for a moment, the vibrations of the enemy's approach echoing through the floor. The hum of the bay's sealed doors was the only other sound. His eyes stayed locked on the prisoner as his mind weighed the options. Keeping her restrained meant she would be safe from making trouble, but it also meant she would be useless in the fight that was seconds away from breaking through the door. Freeing her was a gamble, one that could cost him everything. He stepped forward, boots heavy against the steel floor, and unlocked the bonds around her wrists. Her arms fell free, but the gag stayed in place. She looked up at him with narrowed eyes, testing her fingers as if preparing to move at the first opening. He placed a hand on her shoulder and leaned just close enough for her to hear his words over the sound of the battle. "You fight for me now, or you die here when they come through," he said in a low, steady voice. She gave a single nod, a short and sharp motion that was more about survival than agreement. Raylan pulled a sidearm from his belt and placed it in her hands. Her grip was confident, her movement smooth, showing no hesitation in checking the weapon's charge. Even bound to a chair minutes ago, she carried herself like a soldier ready for combat. The tension between them shifted. It was no longer about defiance or control. It was about survival. The first blow to the bay doors rang like a gong, sending a shudder through the entire room. Metal screeched as the enemy began to cut through. Raylan moved to the side of the door, rifle raised. The prisoner crouched beside a supply crate, weapon aimed at the breach point. She pulled the gag down from her mouth without asking, spitting it to the side, her expression unreadable. The sound of machinery grinding into steel filled the air as a glowing line cut across the door. The panel fell inward with a crash, and the enemy poured in 3 armored figures with rifles raised. Raylan dropped the first with a clean shot to the visor, sparks bursting from the impact. The prisoner fired twice, her shots sharp and controlled, taking down another before it could aim. The last soldier lunged forward, blade drawn, but she sidestepped and drove her elbow into the back of his helmet. He fell hard, motionless before he hit the ground. Smoke drifted into the bay from the destroyed door, and the sound of more boots echoed from the corridor beyond. Raylan glanced at her. She returned the look with a faint smirk, the earlier insult now replaced with something closer to respect. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady. He nodded and grabbed a spare rifle from the rack. Together, they stepped into the hall, the air filled with the metallic tang of battle and the distant calls of soldiers. They moved in tight formation, clearing each junction before advancing. Raylan kept one eye on her, not because he distrusted her now, but because her combat style was unlike anything he had seen. She fought with precision and speed, every movement calculated to end a threat before it could return fire. As they reached a side passage, she motioned for him to stop. "This way," she said. "If you keep heading straight, you'll walk into their main assault force. I know a path to the shuttle bay." Her knowledge of the station's layout surprised him, but there was no time to question it. They followed her route through narrow maintenance tunnels, the low ceilings forcing them to move quickly and silently. The sound of enemy fire faded as they moved deeper into the station's core. Raylan realized she had not only saved them from walking into an ambush but was leading them straight toward their only chance of escape. Whatever else she was a fighter who valued survival as much as he did. When they emerged from the final tunnel, the wide doors of the shuttle bay stood before them, unguarded for now. Raylan scanned the area, then turned to her. "You, get us out of here, and I'll hear your turns after," he said. She gave him a sharp nod, already moving toward the nearest vessel. The war outside was tearing the station apart, but for the moment, they had a way forward. And Raylan knew that. Whatever came next, their fates were now tied together. The shuttle bay was eerily quiet, the hum of the station's engines the only constant sound. Raylan scanned the shadows between the rows of vessels, his rifle ready. The alien woman moved with quick, deliberate steps, her eyes sweeping every corner. Her focus was sharp, like she had done this many times before. "This one," she said, pointing to a mid-sized craft near the far wall. Its ramp was lowered, lights on, and engines primed. Either someone had left it ready to escape, or they were about to steal it from someone else. They crossed the open floor, boots thudding softly against the metal deck. Raylan kept himself between her and the far entrances in case enemy reinforcements came through. She moved ahead, checking the shuttle's interior with practiced efficiency. "Clear," she called, and he followed her inside. The cockpit was compact but well-maintained, controls glowing under the dim light. She slid into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing across the switches. The engines came alive with a steady vibration under their feet. Ryland took the co-pilot's seat, keeping his weapon close. "You fly like you fight?" he asked. Her lips curved in the faintest smirk. "Better," she replied, focusing on the control panel. The bay doors ahead began to open, revealing the dark stretch of space beyond. Stars glimmered against the void, but so did the movement of enemy ships. They weren't going to get out without being noticed. She adjusted the power settings and locked her gaze on the narrow opening. The first shots came before they even cleared the bay. Blue streaks of energy zipped past the shuttle's nose, lighting up the cockpit. She tilted the craft sharply, weaving between the incoming fire with tight, controlled movements. Raylan returned fire from the shuttle's side cannons, tracking enemy fighters as they closed in. One burst apart in a flare of light, but two more replaced it. The escape had turned into a chase, and the odds were still against them. The shuttle rattled under a glancing hit, alarms flaring across the console. "Shields at 60%, she said calmly, adjusting their flight path. Raylan reloaded the cannons, his hand steady despite the shaking. Another fighter cut across their path, forcing her to dive hard toward the shadow of a larger wreck drifting nearby. They skimmed its jagged hull, so close the metal seemed to scrape against their shields. Enemy fire flashed over their heads. Missing by a fraction, she used the wreck for cover, darting between its twisted sections like a predator moving through tall grass. The enemy fighters followed, but the narrow spaces slowed them. Raylan took the chance to fire again, hitting one and sending it spinning into debris. The other kept coming, persistent and fast. "We're not shaking this one," he said, bracing for the next move. She didn't answer, only pushed the shuttle faster toward the edge of the wreck's shadow. As they broke free, the planet below came into view, a sprawling surface of mountains and rivers under a pale blue atmosphere. She angled the shuttle toward it. "We land there," she said. "They'll have to break off or risk following us into the atmosphere." Ryland checked the sensors. "If they do follow, we're going to have a fight on the ground," he replied. She glanced at him briefly. "Then we fight." The simplicity of her answer left no room for argument. The shuttle pierced the atmosphere, flames licking the edges of the viewport. The enemy fighter stayed on their tail, its weapons now silent, as it focused on keeping up through the turbulence. The shuttle shook violently, but she held it steady, eyes locked on a stretch of forest near the base of a mountain range. "Hold on," she said, pushing the craft lower. Trees and ridges rushed up to meet them, the ground speeding closer until they were almost touching it. She leveled the shuttle just above the treetops, using the terrain to break the fighter's line of sight. A moment later, the sensors showed the enemy craft veering away. Whether it had lost them or chosen not to risk the dive, they were alone again. She guided the shuttle toward a clearing and brought it down with a controlled landing. As the engines powered down, silence returned, heavy and expectant. Rylan unstrapped himself, glancing at her. Whatever came next, they were no longer just escaping. They were entering the next stage of the fight together. The forest was still when they stepped out of the shuttle. The air was cool and damp, carrying a scent of moss and wet leaves. Raylan scanned the tree line, rifle raised, while the alien woman moved ahead with light, sure steps. The clearing around them was quiet, but quiet in the middle of a war zone was never safe. Somewhere above the canopy, the distant roar of engines reminded them they were still being hunted. She crouched near a patch of disturbed soil, her fingers brushing over the ground. "Tracks," she said. "Not ours. Someone was here recently." Raylan joined her, studying the impressions. They were deep, heavy, and shaped unlike any human boot. "The Ari scouts?" he asked. She nodded once, her golden eyes narrowing. "If they saw our shuttle land, they'll be circling back." Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. They moved quickly into the trees, using the dense undergrowth for cover. The sunlight filtered through in thin beams, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns. Every sound was amplified, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the call of some unseen bird. Raylan kept his rifle at the ready, the alien woman's smaller weapon in her steady hands. She moved like she belonged here, reading the land in ways he could not. The tracks led them to a narrow ridge overlooking a shallow valley. From here, they could see movement, 3 figures in dark armor, carrying long rifles and scanning the ground below. Their helmets were sleek, their steps precise. "Scouts," she confirmed quietly. "If we take them out, it will buy us time." Raylan adjusted his aim. "And if we don't?" She looked at him without hesitation. "Then they'll call the main force, and we won't have a chance." They spread out along the ridge, taking positions behind fallen logs and thick ferns. The first shot came from Raylan, hitting one of the scouts clean through the visor. The others spun, returning fire toward the ridge. She fired back, her shots fast and accurate, striking one in the chest and sending him tumbling down the slope. The last scout dropped to a knee, using a tree for cover. Raylan moved to flank him, boots silent on the moss-covered ground. The scout never saw him coming. Raylan closed the distance and swung the butt of his rifle into the side of the helmet. The enemy fell, weapon clattering to the ground. Raylan pulled the helmet off to find a pale, narrow face with sharp eyes. Before the scout could speak, the alien woman appeared at his side, her knife already at the captive's throat. "Where's your main force?" she demanded. The scout's lips pressed together in silence. Raylan tightened his grip on the prisoners. "Arm," but she didn't wait for him to act. She twisted the knife just enough to draw a thin line of blood. The scout's eyes flicked between them, then he spoke. 2 clicks east. "They'll move at dusk." She released him with a shove, and he stumbled back, clutching his neck. Raylan raised his rifle, but she shook her head. "Let him run. He'll waste their time explaining why he's still alive." They returned to the clearing, moving faster. Now if the enemy force was close, they had only hours to prepare. The alien woman began setting up a perimeter, marking choke points with small explosives from her gear. Raylan checked the shuttle systems, making sure it could lift off at a moment's notice. The tension between them had shifted again. They were no longer captor and prisoner. They were partners facing the same threat. As the sun dipped lower, the forest shadows grew long and the air turned colder. The sound of movement reached them before they saw the shapes. Figures slipped between the trees, their armor catching. Flashes of fading light. Raylan took position behind a fallen trunk. The alien woman crouched nearby. Their eyes met for a moment, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever came through those trees, they would face it together, and they would not yield. The first wave of enemy soldiers broke through the trees, their rifles flashing as they fired. Raylan returned fire from behind the fallen trunk, his shots dropping 2 before they could close the distance. The alien woman's aim was as sharp as ever, her bursts controlled and deadly. The air was filled with the crack of gunfire and the sharp smell of burning energy rounds. The forest floor shook under the rush of boots and the crash of bodies falling. They held the line through the first attack, but more shadows moved in the trees. The second wave came faster, using the trunks for cover as they tried to flank the clearing. Raylan shifted position, laying down suppressing fire to force them back. The alien woman moved like a shadow herself, darting from one spot to another, cutting down targets before they could aim. Even in the chaos, her movements were precise and calculated. An explosion tore through the edge of the clearing, throwing dirt and smoke into the air. One of her planted charges had gone off, catching 3 soldiers in the blast. The shockwave rattled Raylan's teeth, but it gave them a few precious seconds to regroup. He reloaded quickly, his eyes scanning for the next threat. She dropped beside him, her breathing fast but steady. "They're testing us," she said. "The next push will be the real one." The sound came like a drumbeat, heavy boots striking the ground in unison. The final assault force stepped into view, their armor heavier, their weapons larger. These were not scouts or standard soldiers. They were shock troops, trained to crush resistance in close quarters. Raylan tightened his grip on his rifle, while she reached for the blade at her side. "When they close the gap, stay behind me," she told him, her voice firm. He gave a single nod. The charge began. Energy blasts lit up the clearing, cutting through branches and ferns. Raylan fired until his rifle's heat gauge warned him to stop, then drew his sidearm. She met the first shock trooper head-on, her blade flashing in the dim light. The strike cut clean through armor, and the soldier fell before he could strike back. Raylan moved to cover her flank, dropping another who tried to approach from the side. The battle closed in tight, every second a fight to survive. One of the troopers slammed into Raylan, knocking him to the ground. His weapon flew from his hands, skidding out of reach. Before the enemy could finish him, she was there, driving her blade through the trooper's chest. She pulled him to his feet with one hand, her golden eyes locked on his. "Stay with me," she said, pulling him back toward the trunk. The moment lasted only an instant, but it carried more weight than words could explain. Together, they pushed back against the last of the shock troops. Her blade flashed again and again, each strike bringing another enemy down. Raylan's sidearm roared until the final magazine was empty. Then, at last, the forest was still. The clearing was littered with bodies, the smell of scorched metal heavy in the air. Raylan lowered his weapon and let out a slow breath. She stood beside him, her blade dripping, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The quiet stretched between them as they surveyed the field. The enemy had been stopped here, but they both knew this was only one battle in a larger war. She turned to him, her voice softer now. "You could have left me in that chair," she said. "You didn't. And now we stand here alive." Raylan met her gaze, understanding passing between them without the need for more words. What had begun as defiance had become something else entirely. She stepped closer, her golden eyes holding his. "By my people's code, I owe you my life. By my choice, I will fight beside you until this war ends." Raylan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we fight." The forest around them was silent, but in that silence, a bond had been forged. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together, not as enemies or captor and prisoner, but as allies, bound by survival and choice.